Inside the modest but warmly lit kitchen, Emily sat at the small wooden table, her hands wrapped loosely around a mug of tea that had long since cooled. She stirred it absently, watching the slow swirl of steam fade upward, even though she hadn't taken a sip in quite some time. The tea wasn't really about comfort. It was a reason to sit still, to delay, to keep her hands busy while her thoughts grew louder. Across the room, her father Richard leaned against the counter, pretending to read the evening paper. The rustle of pages was a familiar sound in the house, but tonight it felt forced, out of rhythm. His sharp, experienced eyes, hidden just behind the edges of the paper, had caught every subtle shift in his daughter's expression. He had raised her alone since her mother's passing, guiding her through years of grief and growth. Over time, he had learned to understand her silences better than her words, and tonight, her silence felt heavier than usual. Emily was rarely quiet around him. Their relationship had always been easy, filled with laughter that stretched into late-night talks, old movies, and quiet dinners where nothing needed to be said. But lately, something in her had begun to retreat inward. Richard could feel it, the same way one senses a storm long before it breaks. He wasn't a man who pushed easily. He had learned that timing mattered more than words, but sometimes love meant stepping past hesitation and asking the question that might open an old wound. After a long moment, he folded the newspaper, set it aside, and spoke softly. His voice was steady, deep, the kind that carried both comfort and truth. "Emily," he said, eyes never leaving hers, "what is it that you're afraid of?" The question caught her completely off guard. Her hand froze mid-stir. The spoon clinked against the mug. For a second, she couldn't breathe. She lifted her eyes, startled to see the quiet patience in his face. Not judgment, not frustration, just love in its purest, most knowing form. Her father's gaze was the same one that had seen her cry through heartbreak, seen her smile through new beginnings, seen her fall apart and gather herself again. He had seen every version of her, and somehow that only made it harder to hide now. For a fleeting moment, she considered lying, offering some simple explanation that would make him drop it. But the look in his eyes told her that wouldn't work this time. He already knew this silence came from somewhere deeper. The air thickened between them, filled with the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the sound of rain beginning to tap faintly against the window. Emily shifted in her seat, her fingers tightening around the mug. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled slightly. "Afraid?" she echoed, barely above a whisper. I don't know. Maybe of being hurt again. Maybe of choosing wrong." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the closest she could get without falling apart. Richard's expression softened. He crossed the room and took a seat across from her, his presence steady and grounding. He didn't speak right away. He simply sat there, giving her space to breathe, to let the weight of what she'd said linger. When he finally spoke, his words came slowly, carefully measured. "You know," he said, "fear is often the one thing that keeps us from finding what we're really meant to have." Something about his tone, so calm yet so sure, made her chest tighten. Emily had heard her father give advice all her life, but this was different. This wasn't about her job, her plans, or the little worries that came and went. This was about her heart. Her mind drifted, unbidden, to Michael, the man who had been quietly orbiting her life for months now. Patient, kind, unshakably steady. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. And still she had hesitated. Every time he reached out, she had pulled back, not because she didn't care, but because she did. Her heart had been broken before, and she had promised herself never to fall so hard again. But the wall she had built to protect herself had started to feel like a cage. Richard watched her closely, catching the faint flicker of emotion across her face. "Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying both warmth and warning. "I see the way you hold yourself back. You think you're protecting yourself, but sometimes holding on too tightly to that protection is just another way of losing what matters most." The words hit her like a quiet wave, gentle but unstoppable. She blinked, her throat tightening. For a moment she wanted to argue, to tell him he didn't understand, but she knew he did. Richard spoke from a lifetime of mistakes, of lessons learned the hard way. He wasn't quoting wisdom. He was offering truth carved from his own scars. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall. The house felt both too still and too full at once. Emily wanted to leave, to escape the weight of his words. But another part of her, the braver part, wanted to stay and hear more. Because deep down, she knew her father wasn't talking about fear in general. He was talking about her, about the way she'd been too afraid to let life in. Her voice came out fragile, uncertain. But what if I make the wrong choice? Richard leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. His eyes softened with understanding, but his voice remained steady. Then you learn, he said simply. That's all any of us can do. None of us get it right every time, Emily. We try, we fail, we try again. But the worst thing you can do, the one mistake you can't afford, is letting fear make the choice for you. Her throat tightened painfully. She blinked back tears, unwilling to let them fall. Not tonight, not in front of him. But his words had reached a part of her she had kept locked away for too long. Richard leaned back again, giving her the grace of silence. He didn't press further, didn't demand understanding. He just let the space between them breathe. Emily nodded faintly, unable to say more. She rose from the table with her mug still half full, murmured something about heading upstairs, and disappeared into the quiet of her room. She sat on her bed, tea untouched, staring out the rain-speckled window. Her father's words looped endlessly in her mind. What is it that you're afraid of? Sleep wouldn't come easily that night. The question lingered like a soft echo in her chest. For the first time in a long while, Emily began to wonder. Maybe it wasn't the fear of being hurt that held her back. Maybe it was the fear of missing something beautiful because she never dared to reach for it. And somewhere deep inside, something began to shift. She didn't know it yet, but that single question, spoken so simply, so gently, was the beginning of a change she could never undo. The next morning dawned quiet, wrapped in the calm that only Sundays seemed to hold. Rain tapped rhythmically against the kitchen windows, soft and steady. Emily sat at the same table again, this time with a notebook open in front of her. The page was nearly blank. She had been trying to write something, anything, to make sense of what she felt. But the words refused to come. Richard entered quietly, his familiar plaid shirt faded from years of wear. He carried his coffee and gave her a knowing glance. Emily looked down quickly, avoiding his eyes, afraid that one more question might unravel her completely. But he didn't ask. He sat across from her, sipping his coffee in easy silence. After a long moment, he set the mug down, folded his hands, and said quietly, "Emily, can I tell you something I've never told you before?" She looked up, surprised by the tone in his voice. "What do you mean?" Richard's gaze drifted toward the rain outside. A faint, wistful smile touched his lips. "When I was your age," he said, "I almost lost the best thing that ever happened to me, your mother, because I was afraid." "Just like you are now." Emily froze. Her breath caught. Her father rarely spoke about his and her mother's past beyond small, warm memories. Never like this. Never about his own fears. "What do you mean?" she asked again, her voice trembling slightly. He leaned back, hands wrapped around his mug as though it anchored him to the moment. "I thought love was supposed to happen when everything else was perfect," he said. "The right job, the right plans, the right time. I told myself I wasn't ready, that I needed to get everything in order first. But the truth was," he paused, shaking his head softly. "The truth was that I was just scared. Scared of not being enough. Scared of failing." His words cut through her like light through fog. They sounded too familiar, like her own thoughts being read aloud. He went on, voice quiet but unwavering. "Your mother wasn't like that. She didn't wait for life to give her permission. She jumped. She laughed. She loved before she knew how things would turn out. She believed in taking chances, even when you couldn't see the ground beneath your feet. And he smiled faintly, eyes filled with old memory. "I almost let her go because I wanted certainty." Emily's heart clenched. "But you didn't," she whispered. He shook his head, smiling softly. No, I didn't. But not because I suddenly stopped being afraid. I stayed because I realized something. Love doesn't wait for perfect. It asks for courage, not comfort. If you wait for life to line up neatly, you'll wait forever. And you'll lose the very thing you're waiting for. The words washed over her, steady and true. She gripped the edge of her notebook, her mind already drifting to Michael. The way he smiled, the way he waited, the way she had kept him at arm's length. Her father's story wasn't just about the past. It was a mirror. And in it, she saw her own reflection clearly for the first time. How I was terrified of letting her down. I never sent it. I was too ashamed of sounding weak. But I kept that letter, and every time I read it, I remember the man. I almost was the man who almost lost the love of his life because he couldn't step past his fear. Emily's eyes widened. A letter. She had never heard of it before. A strange pull grew inside her. A need to see those words, to feel the proof of what he was saying. What did you do after that night? She asked, her voice trembling. Richard's smile deepened, lined with both regret and pride. I stopped waiting. I showed up at her door the next morning. I told her the truth, that I was scared that I didn't have it all figured out, but that I loved her enough to try anyway, and that was all she needed to hear, because love doesn't need perfect. It needs honesty. Emily sat back in her chair, stunned. His words sank deep, cutting through her carefully built walls. She thought of the time she had stood outside Michael's apartment but turned away. The time she had drafted a text but deleted it before sending, always waiting for the right moment, the perfect time. The certainty that didn't exist. Her father's story was her mirror. And now, sitting across from him, she realized he wasn't just sharing his past. He was giving her a choice. The rain outside grew heavier, filling the silence between them. Emily looked at her father, seeing not just the strong man who had raised her, but the young man he once was scared, uncertain, almost ready to let love slip away. And for the first time in a long time, she understood. Her fear wasn't protecting her. It was keeping her from living. Her father took another sip of coffee, expression calm, as if he had simply told her an ordinary story. But to Emily it was anything but ordinary. It was a story that changed the way she saw herself, her choices, and the fragile line between holding back and stepping forward. That night when she lay in bed, her father's words replayed again and again. Love is about courage, not comfort. She didn't know what she would do yet, but deep inside something had shifted. And as she drifted into sleep, she realized she was standing at the same crossroad her father had faced years ago. The question was, would she be brave enough to choose differently? The night after her father shared his story, Emily couldn't quiet her mind. She tossed and turned, replaying his words over and over. Love is about courage, not comfort. It was a simple sentence, yet it carried more weight than anything she had heard in years. She thought about her own life. About the walls she had built around her heart. About Michael's patient eyes waiting for her to let him in. Fear had become her closest companion, but now it felt like a thief, stealing chances she didn't even give herself. By midnight, sleep was impossible. Emily got out of bed and wandered through the house, her bare feet patting softly against the wooden floor. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain from the storm earlier. Something inside her tugged toward the attic. It wasn't a logical thought, just a quiet pull, as if the answers she needed were hidden up there. She grabbed the old ladder and climbed carefully. The attic smelled of dust and wood filled with boxes stacked high, each one holding fragments of the past. She turned on the small light, its glow barely reaching the corners, and began searching through the boxes. She found photo albums, holiday decorations, stacks of her mother's books, and then in a worn brown box near the back. She found something different, a bundle of envelopes tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Emily sat on the floor and carefully untied the ribbon. The letters were in her father's handwriting, though the ink was lighter, older. Most of them were addressed to her mother. Some had been sent, others left unsent, but all of them told stories of a younger man in love. Her hands trembled as she opened one of the envelopes. Inside was a half-written letter, the ink smudged in places as if her father's hand had hesitated. She began to read, her heart pounding with every line. I don't know if I deserve you. I'm scared I'll let you down. I don't have everything figured out, and I'm afraid of failing. But the truth is, I can't stop thinking about you. I don't want to lose you. Even if I'm not ready, even if I'm scared, I know I want to try." The words stopped abruptly, the letter unfinished. Emily stared at the page, her throat tightening. She had never seen her father so vulnerable, so raw. To her, he had always been steady and sure, the kind of man who carried others when they couldn't carry themselves. But here on this page was proof that he had once been just like her, afraid, uncertain, desperate not to lose someone he loved. She pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes stinging with tears. It was like hearing his voice from years ago, whispering the same fears she carried now. If he had once felt this way and still found the courage to step forward, maybe she could too. Emily stayed in the attic for a long time, reading through more letters. Some were short and playful, filled with little notes about his day. Others were deeper, wrestling with the uncertainty of love and life. But it was the unfinished one that lingered with her. The one that showed not just love, but the fear behind it. When she finally came downstairs, it was nearly 2 in the morning. She carried the letter with her, unable to put it back. It felt like it belonged to her now. It's like a bridge between her father's past and her present. The next morning, she placed the envelope on the kitchen table as her father poured his coffee. He glanced at it and chuckled softly, recognizing it immediately. "You found that old thing?" he said, shaking his head. Emily nodded, her voice quiet. "You never sent it?" Richard smiled, a little embarrassed. "No, I thought your mother would laugh at me for being so dramatic." But Emily shook her head quickly. "No, Dad, it's not dramatic. It's real. It's everything I've been feeling. The fear, the doubt, the wanting to hold on, but being too scared to say it." Her voice broke slightly as she finished. Richard's eyes softened. He reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. "That letter was me at my most afraid. But you know what? It also marked the moment I realized I had a choice. Keep hiding or take the risk and tell her how I felt. I chose the risk, and it gave me the greatest years of my life." Emily felt the weight of his words sink deep. She looked down at the letter again, her father's younger self reaching out to her through ink and paper. It wasn't just history. It was a message. Proof that courage didn't mean not being afraid. It meant loving anyway. That day Emily carried the letter everywhere. She tucked it in her notebook, kept it close like a secret reminder. At work, she couldn't focus. She thought about Michael, about the time she had smiled at him, then pulled back, about the invitations she had declined because she felt not ready. She remembered the way his eyes lingered on her, full of patience, but also uncertainty. How long could he wait? How long could she? The unfinished letter haunted her thoughts. It was as if her father's younger self was whispering, "Don't let fear steal this from you." That evening, Emily sat on her bed. The letter spread open in front of her. She thought about writing her own words unfinished, just like her father once had, but instead she picked up her phone. Her finger hovered over Michael's name, her heart racing. She wanted to call to speak, to tell him the truth. But fear held her back again, whispering all its usual doubts. And yet the letter lay there in front of her, a reminder that fear wasn't the end. It was only the beginning if she let it be. She set the phone down, pressing the letter to her chest once more. She wasn't ready tonight, but for the first time, she believed she could be ready soon. The attic had given her more than just a piece of her father's past. It had given her a glimpse of her own future, one she could still shape, if she found the courage to finish what her father once started. And as she drifted to sleep that night, the words from the unfinished letter echoed in her mind. "I don't know if I deserve you, but I don't want to lose you." They weren't just his words anymore. They were hers too. The morning sun broke through thin clouds, filling the kitchen with a golden glow. Emily sat at the table with the unfinished letter lying between her hands. She had hardly slept the night before, her mind circling the same words again and again. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard her father's younger voice in her head, trembling but honest. "I don't know if I deserve you. I don't want to lose you." Richard entered the kitchen with his usual calm stride, hair still damp from his morning shower. When he saw the letter in front of her, he chuckled softly. "I see you've been digging through the past." Emily lifted her eyes, searching his face. "Why didn't you ever send it?" He sat down across from her, picking up his coffee. For a moment, he studied the letter as though it belonged to another man entirely. "Because I was ashamed. I thought if I showed your mother how scared I was, she'd think less of me. I didn't want her to see my doubts." Emily shook her head quickly, emotions swelling in her voice. "But Dad, this letter is beautiful. It's real. It's everything I've been afraid to admit myself." She leaned closer, her voice lowering. "Did she ever know? Did you ever tell her how scared you were?" Richard smiled faintly, his eyes soft with memory. "Not with words like those, but she knew. She always knew, and she loved me anyway." He took a sip of coffee before continuing. "That's the thing about love, Emily. It isn't about showing up perfect. It's about showing up honest." Her throat tightened. She thought of Michael's patience, his warmth, the way he looked at her like she mattered. She had been keeping parts of herself hidden, convincing herself it was safer that way. But was it safer? Or was she just letting fear keep her from the very thing she wanted most? Emily touched the letter lightly with her fingertips. "So what did you do after writing this?" Richard's eyes met hers, steady and kind. "I stopped overthinking. The very next morning I went to her apartment. I told her the truth that I didn't have it all figured out, that I was scared, but that I loved her enough to try." He paused, his voice warm. "That was all she needed to hear. And that's why I still had her by my side until the day she left this world." Silence filled the kitchen, but it wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that held meaning, the kind that allowed words to settle in deep. Emily felt her heart pounding, as if his story had unlocked something in her. "Dad," she whispered, "I think I've been doing exactly what you almost did. I think I've been pushing someone away because I'm afraid." Richard raised an eyebrow gently. "Michael," her cheeks warmed. She hadn't even said his name, but of course her father knew. He had always known. "Yes," she admitted. "He's kind. He makes me laugh. He listens. He's everything. But I've been keeping him at arm's length because I tell myself I'm not ready, because I don't want to make the wrong choice again." Richard leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. His voice was soft but carried strength. "Emily, listen to me. Love will always carry risk. You will never be completely ready. But if you wait for certainty, you'll wait your whole life. The question is he worth the risk?" Tears blurred her vision. She nodded slowly, her voice trembling. "Yes, he is." Her father smiled gently, his eyes proud. "Then don't let fear steal this from you. You've seen what fear almost cost me. I don't want you to live with that kind of regret." The room grew quiet again, and for a long moment, Emily just sat there, letting his words sink in. She felt as though she were standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. It scared her, but it also thrilled her. Later that day, found herself holding her phone, staring at Michael's name and her contacts. Her hands shook as she debated calling, but the words from her father replayed in her mind. "Love is about courage, not comfort." Her heart raced as she typed a message. "Can I see you tonight? I need to talk." She hovered over the send button, fear pressing down on her. What if he didn't feel the same anymore? What if it was too late? Then she thought of her father's letter and finished unsent. She didn't want her story to remain half-written. With a deep breath, she pressed send. Within minutes, his reply came. "Of course, come over anytime." Her chest tightened, both with fear and anticipation. This was at the moment she had been avoiding for so long. That evening, Emily stood outside Michael's apartment building. The letter was folded in her pocket, her father's words burning in her heart. The hallway smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paint, and the closer she got to his door, the louder her heartbeat became. She raised her hand, hesitated, then lowered it again. Doubt swirled in her mind. What if she said the wrong thing? What if she ruined everything? But then she remembered the look in her father's eyes that morning. The story of how he almost let love slip away. No, she couldn't let fear decide for her anymore. She knocked. Moments later, the door opened and Michael stood there, surprised but smiling. "Emily," he said, his voice warm. "I wasn't sure if I'd see you tonight." Her breath caught. This was her chance, her moment to step past fear. And though her hands shook, she finally spoke. "Michael, I'm scared. I don't have everything figured out, but I don't want to lose you, not because I was too afraid to try." The words hung in the air between them, raw and trembling but honest. Michael looked at her for a long moment, his expression softening. Then he stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said quietly. "We'll figure it out together." As she walked inside, Emily knew something had shifted forever. Later that night, sitting on the porch with her father, she whispered, "Dad, your letter, your words, they gave me the courage to do this. I'll never forget what you said." Richard only smiled, sipping his coffee. "That's what fathers are for, Emily." And deep inside, She knew her life would never be the same. The night Emily knocked on Michael's door became a turning point. Her words had been shaky, her voice uncertain, but they were honest. And for the first time in years, she felt free. Sitting with him in his small living room later that night, she realized something simple but life-changing. Love wasn't about perfect timing. It was about showing up. Michael listened quietly as she spoke, letting her pour out everything she had held inside. She told him about her fears, her doubts, and the walls she had built around her heart. She admitted how she had almost let him slip away. When she finally stopped talking, there was silence. But it wasn't the heavy silence of rejection. It was the silence of understanding. Michael reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "Emily, I've never asked you to be perfect," he said softly. "I just wanted you to be real with me. That's all I've ever needed." His words melted something inside her. For so long, she had believed she needed to hide the fragile parts of herself, but in that moment she realized those every parts were what made love real. She leaned against him, and though nothing about their future was certain, she felt steady in his presence. The next few weeks passed quickly. Emily found herself smiling more, laughing more, letting her guard down in ways she hadn't in years. Michael didn't rush her. He simply stood beside her, showing her what it meant to be chosen every day. She carried her father's letter in her purse, folded neatly as a reminder that fear didn't have to win. One evening, Emily sat with her father on the porch. The sky stretched wide above them, painted in deep oranges and blues as the sun set. Richard rocked gently in his chair, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Emily sat beside him, the letter tucked into her sweater pocket. "Dad," she began softly, "I went to see Michael. I told him the truth. I told him I was scared, but I didn't want to lose him." Richard's eyes twinkled as he turned to look at her. "And how did he take it?" Emily smiled. "He just said he never needed me to be perfect, only honest. And for the first time, I believe that might be enough." Her father nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "That's love, Emily. It doesn't ask for certainty. It asks for courage. And I'm proud of you for choosing courage." Tears stung her eyes. But this time they weren't born of fear. They were born of relief, of hope. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tightly. "Dad, I'll never forget what you said that day. Your words changed everything." Richard smiled faintly. That's what fathers are for. The moment lingered between them, filled with unspoken love, the kind that didn't need words. In the weeks that followed, Emily's life began to shift. It wasn't that everything suddenly became easy. There were still doubts, still moments of fear, but she faced them differently now. She leaned into honesty, into courage, into the kind of love her father had once fought for. One afternoon, while walking along the waterfront with Michael, she slipped her hand into his and whispered, "I don't know what the future holds, but I want to write it with you." Michael squeezed her hand, his eyes warm. "Then we'll write it together." Page by page, her heart swelled. It wasn't a promise of perfection. It was a promise of trying, and that was enough. At home, Emily often found herself rereading her father's unfinished letter, the smudged ink, the trembling handwriting. It all reminded her that even the strongest people had moments of fear. What mattered wasn't the fear itself, but what they did after. Her father had chosen to step forward, and because of that choice, she existed. Now it was her turn to choose. On a quiet evening, Emily sat at her desk with a blank sheet of paper. For a long time, she stared at it, remembering her father's unfinished words. Then she picked up her pen and began to write. Not to Michael, not to her father, but to herself. "I am scared. I may fail, but I won't let fear make my choices anymore. I choose courage. I choose love." She folded the paper and slipped it inside the envelope with her father's letter. Two voices now lived inside it, his and hers, bound together across time. That weekend, Emily and Michael went to visit Richard. They sat together in the backyard, the late summer air filled with the sound of birds and the scent of blooming roses her mother once planted. Richard watched them with quiet pride, seeing the way Emily leaned into Michael's side, the way his hand rested protectively over hers. At one point, Richard said almost to himself, "Your mother would have liked him." Emily's heart caught, but she smiled. "I think so too." They stayed until the stars came out, laughter filling the night air. And when Emily finally walked Michael to his car, she paused before saying goodbye. "Thank you for waiting for me," she whispered. Michael smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'd wait as long as it takes, but I'm glad you didn't wait forever. Her chest tightened with gratitude with love. For once, she didn't hold back. She leaned in and kissed him softly, not with hesitation, but with certainty that came from choosing. Finally, to live beyond her fare. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's world grew brighter. She found herself dreaming again, planning again, opening her heart fully to the unknown. And every step of the way she carried her father's words with her words that had once belonged to his story, but now shaped her own. Late one evening, as she sat on the porch beside her father watching the stars, she whispered, "Dad, I think I understand now. Love isn't about being ready, it's about being brave." Richard looked at her, his smile proud and gentle. "Exactly, Emily, and you found your courage." She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. In that moment, she knew she would never forget what he had said that day. Never forget how his words had changed the course of her life. The letter might have been unfinished, but their story was just beginning. Written not in fear, but in love.